Imagine standing on the shore of a world 20,000 years ago. The sea lies far lower than today, exposing plains where modern cities now rest beneath the waves. The air is sharp with cold, for the ice sheets stretch down from the north like slow-moving giants, their weight pressing the crust of the earth. In scattered valleys, small groups of humans hunt, gather, and whisper stories around fires that flicker against the night. According to the textbooks, this is the limit of our past, the edge beyond which no civilization could have existed. Yet for centuries, people have wondered if that story is incomplete. Legends speak of lost continents, of empires swallowed by the ocean, of wisdom erased by catastrophe. From Plato's tale of Atlantis to Hindu texts describing cities drowned in floods, from Polynesian chants of vanished lands to Native American traditions of destruction and renewal, the theme repeats across cultures. Was this only myth, born from imagination and fear, or could it be a memory, distorted yet persistent, carried from an age we no longer recognize? This book follows that question with careful steps. It resists fantasy, but it does not dismiss curiosity. Archaeology shows us one story of humanity, but gaps remain, and mysteries still unsettle the surface of what we believe we know. To explore the possibility of a lost global civilization 20,000 years ago, we must move through science, myth, and history together. We must be willing to look both at evidence in stone and sediment, and at the ideas that refuse to fade from human storytelling. The human imagination has always leaned toward mystery. Even in the modern age, with satellites peering into every corner of the planet and deep-sea submersibles crawling across the ocean floor, the suspicion lingers that something remains hidden. Perhaps it is only natural. Our species has spent most of its history surrounded by the unknown, forced to guess at what lay beyond the horizon, or beneath the waves, or in the skies overhead. Myths became the scaffolding of that uncertainty, the language by which we shaped our fears and hopes into stories. One of the most powerful of these myths is the idea that there once was another world, a civilization older than any we know, destroyed long before the first cities of recorded history began to rise. The allure of such a vision lies in its promise that the story of humanity is far deeper than textbooks allow. When we think of history, we usually begin with Egypt, Mesopotamia, or the Indus Valley. But the dream of a lost civilization pushes the starting line far back into the shadows. It tells us that there might have been cultures capable of sailing oceans, of erecting monuments, of mastering sciences we struggle to explain, long before the pyramids or the ziggurats. This is not simply speculation about ruins. It is a challenge to the very framework by which we measure ourselves. If another world existed and vanished, then our age is not the first experiment in human progress, but only the latest. The most famous expression of this dream came from Plato. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written in the 4th century before the Common Era, he described Atlantis. According to him, Atlantis was a powerful island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was larger than Libya and Asia combined, he claimed, and its kings ruled over lands across the seas. Yet in a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis sank beneath the waves, leaving only mud shoals to mark its grave. Plato's intention may have been allegory, a parable about hubris and divine punishment, but the world seized upon it as history. For more than 2 millennia, thinkers, explorers, and dreamers have searched for the drowned kingdom, placing it in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, or even Antarctica. Atlantis became a mirror in which each generation saw its own hopes and anxieties reflected. From Atlantis, the catalogue of lost continents only grew. In the 19th century, European writers proposed the existence of Mu, a vast Pacific landmass destroyed by earthquakes and floods. Though based on little more than speculative translations and the appetite of the public for grand narratives, the idea took hold. Around the same time, naturalists hypothesizing about the distribution of lemurs suggested a land bridge across the Indian Ocean. This hypothetical bridge was named Lemuria, though science quickly discarded the notion when plate tectonics revealed how continents truly move. Lemuria found new life in the occult circles of theosophy. It became reimagined as the cradle of an ancient and spiritually advanced humanity, wiped out before memory began. These stories endure because they serve more than curiosity. They offer grandeur to a species that has always wondered whether it once possessed more than it does now. They also offer explanations for the gaps and mysteries that remain in our knowledge. How did ancient peoples chart the heavens so accurately? How did they construct monuments of such scale and precision? The temptation is strong to suppose that they were inheriting fragments from a much earlier, lost civilization. By suggesting that humanity had already achieved greatness once, these myths whisper that we ourselves might fall and that everything we build might one day be forgotten. And yet, the discipline of archaeology paints a different timeline. The consensus view is that complex civilization emerged only after the last ice age ended. Farming developed around 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, with animal domestication, pottery, and permanent settlements following closely behind. By 6,000 years ago, the first true cities rose in Mesopotamia, and written language appeared to record their deeds. This framework is supported by layers of evidence, from carbon dating to settlement remains, and it leaves little room for the possibility of an earlier, global civilization. But the tension remains. Between the romantic myths of drowned continents and the sober narrative of archaeology lies a space filled with speculation. It is this space that fuels debates in books, documentaries, and late-night conversations. Perhaps Plato was inventing a parable, yet perhaps his story preserved a distorted echo of real events. Perhaps Mu and Lemuria are pure inventions, yet perhaps they resonate because people sense the sea itself has swallowed countless forgotten lands. Our desire to peer further back is not easily extinguished. The Ice Age, in particular, holds a magnetic pull on the imagination. If the last glacial period lowered sea levels by more than 120 meters, then entire coastlines where early people may have lived now rest beneath the waves. Could there be ruins hidden in those drowned plains? Could myths of floods and sunken kingdoms be the cultural memory of rising seas that drowned ancestral lands? Even without proof, the possibilities spark our imagination. To investigate, we must first step into that world as it truly was, 20,000 years ago, when ice ruled the north and seas lay far lower than today. The dream of forgotten civilizations has always thrived at the margins of knowledge, where the evidence is fragmentary and the imagination fills the gaps. When early explorers returned from distant shores with tales of temples swallowed by jungles or vast walls stretching across deserts, the public often assumed that these were remnants of a people greater than any known. In truth, they were the ruins of cultures like the Maya or the Khmer, civilizations that flourished and collapsed within the last few thousand years. Yet the sight of toppled stone cities hidden in remote landscapes was enough to fuel speculation that such wonders could have existed long before recorded history began. Human psychology plays a part in this fascination. We are drawn to mystery because it suggests that the world is larger than the confines of what we know. A lost continent speaks not only to the past, but to the future. If an advanced civilization once fell, then our own might fall too. The myth carries both a warning and a promise. The warning is that nature or fate can erase us as easily as it erases any culture. The promise is that history is cyclical, that greatness can rise again. This duality explains why stories of Atlantis or Lemuria are retold endlessly, even when evidence remains absent. Plato's account of Atlantis is often read as allegory, but many later interpreters took it literally. Medieval scholars speculated on its location. Renaissance cartographers placed islands on maps where no islands existed, and Enlightenment thinkers debated whether New World civilizations might be survivors of the lost empire. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Atlantis became a canvas on which writers projected everything from theories of racial origins to fantasies of extraterrestrial contact. Its flexibility as a myth ensured that it could survive in countless forms, adapting to each new cultural obsession. The same is true of Mu and Lemuria. Neither originated from solid science, yet both survived in literature and mysticism because they filled a psychological need. They offered origins for ancient peoples, explanations for cultural similarities across oceans, and a sense of grandeur to the human story. In an era when colonial exploration was bringing back reports of unfamiliar cultures, the notion of a sunken motherland that had seeded them all carried a certain romance. Over time, Mu became associated with advanced technology, lost wisdom, and even supernatural powers. Lemuria became a stage for imagined spiritual evolution, its people said to possess knowledge that surpassed our own. Though archaeology rejected these ideas, they remained alive in popular imagination, and even today are invoked in books and online forums. Modern archaeology insists on evidence. Radiocarbon dating, stratigraphy, and genetic studies have given us a robust framework for human prehistory. According to that framework, humanity lived in small hunter-gatherer bands for the majority of its existence. Only after the Ice Age receded did agriculture emerge, and only with agriculture could large settlements, social hierarchies, and monumental architecture appear. From this perspective, the notion of a global civilization 20,000 years ago seems implausible. No material evidence has been found that indicates urban centers or technological development at that scale, and yet, absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Archaeologists themselves acknowledge that much of human history is still buried, both literally and figuratively. Entire landscapes are lost beneath rising seas, while erosion, tectonic activity, and time have erased countless traces. Excavation has only touched a small fraction of the Earth's surface, and even in well-studied regions, discoveries still overturn assumptions. The unearthing of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, for example, revealed a site 12,000 years old, older than agriculture, and yet built with astonishing sophistication. This suggests that our ancestors were capable of more than previously believed, and it keeps alive the question of what else might be hidden. The tension between myth and science creates fertile ground for speculation. Writers such as Graham Hancock have built careers arguing that myths preserve the memory of a real but forgotten civilization. Critics point out that the evidence is selective, and interpretations often stretch beyond what is reasonable. Still, the persistence of these theories shows how deeply the idea resonates. Even when scholars dismiss Atlantis as allegory and Mu as invention, the public imagination continues to demand that there must have been something more. Part of this demand arises from the simple fact that the Earth itself bears scars of catastrophe. Ice ages, floods, volcanic eruptions, and meteor impacts have shaped the surface of the planet again and again. Civilizations like ours are fragile in comparison to the span of geological time. If we were to vanish tomorrow, what would remain after 10,000 years? Perhaps only scattered monuments, fragments of metal, and myths passed along by survivors. If that is true, then it is not impossible to imagine that another cycle of rise and fall could have occurred long before our own. To explore this possibility responsibly, we must move step by step. We must examine what the world was like 20,000 years ago, during the height of the last glacial maximum. We must ask where humans lived, what they could achieve, and what evidence survives. Only then can we evaluate whether myths of Atlantis and other lost lands are dreams without anchor or echoes of something real. The path begins with the Ice Age, when ice and sea shaped the boundaries of the human world and when the stage was set for legends of loss. The enduring grip of lost world myths reveals more about ourselves than about history. For centuries, people have longed to believe that the Earth hides great secrets, that beneath the oceans or deep within jungles lie remnants of empires far older than Egypt or Mesopotamia. It is not merely a hunger for discovery, but a way of situating humanity within a grander story. The idea of Atlantis or Lemuria suggests that we are not the pinnacle of progress, but inheritors of a cycle, destined to rise and fall as those before us did. It gives meaning to our fragility, turning the threat of collapse into a chapter in a longer, repeating epic. Even in modern times, the notion refuses to die. New Age movements speak of Atlantis as if it were a spiritual homeland, a place of enlightenment destroyed by human pride. Novelists reimagine Lemuria as the cradle of telepathic sages or lost scientists. Popular documentaries point to underwater rock formations or anomalous artifacts as proof of a forgotten civilization. In each retelling, the story adapts to fit contemporary hopes and fears. In the age of exploration, it promised hidden continents waiting to be found. In the age of technology, it promises advanced knowledge lost to disaster. In an era of climate anxiety, it warns of seas rising again to drown our cities, just as they may have drowned others long ago. The resilience of these myths is amplified by the gaps in our knowledge. Archaeology has made tremendous advances, but much remains uncertain. Entire stretches of human prehistory are known only through scattered tools, bones, and fragments of art. Cave paintings and carved figurines tell us that symbolic thought was already flourishing more than 30,000 years ago. Yet the archaeological record between those expressions and the first cities is faint and fragile. Every new discovery, whether of a burial, a settlement, or a megalithic structure, has the potential to rewrite the timeline. Göbekli Tepe shocked the scholarly world because it proved that complex architectural and artistic achievements were possible thousands of years earlier than once assumed. If such a site could remain hidden until the late 20th century, who can be certain that other surprises do not still wait beneath soil or sea? Skepticism remains essential, for without it, speculation becomes fantasy. The discipline of archaeology demands evidence, and so far no evidence supports the existence of a global civilization 20,000 years ago. The absence of metal tools, writing, or large-scale urban ruins from that era points strongly towards societies limited to hunting and gathering. Yet it is also true that the sea has claimed enormous territories since the last ice age. Vast coastal plains that would have been attractive to human settlement are now submerged. If early groups did cluster along those coasts, their traces may lie hidden far beneath the waves, difficult to find and easy to overlook. This does not prove the existence of a lost civilization, but it keeps alive the possibility of discoveries that could reshape what we think we know. To imagine a forgotten world is to acknowledge the silence of the past. Nature is an eraser as well as a creator. Forests swallow cities, deserts bury temples, rivers shift and conceal entire cultures beneath layers of silt. If the Roman Empire had been destroyed entirely in the 1st century, leaving only scattered ruins and fragments, how would future archaeologists interpret its scope? If our modern world were erased by catastrophe, what would remain after 20 millennia? Perhaps only a few structures of stone, with the rest reduced to dust. That perspective allows us to understand how myths may grow. The survivors of floods or volcanic eruptions would tell their descendants of lands that vanished and peoples destroyed. Over generations, memory becomes story becomes legend, and legend becomes myth of lost continents. The challenge is to balance wonder with reason. To believe without evidence is to risk falsehood, but to ignore the possibility of discovery is to risk arrogance. Human history is incomplete, written only in fragments that survived accident and chance. The myths of Atlantis, Mu, and Lemuria may not be literal histories, but they remain powerful metaphors for the fragility of civilization. They remind us that the line dividing history from prehistory is not a wall but a veil, and that beyond it lies a vast expanse of time in which our ancestors lived, dreamed, and told stories we can only faintly reconstruct. As this chapter closes, we stand at the threshold between imagination and science. The myths invite us to believe in forgotten grandeur, while archaeology insists on a slower, steadier climb toward complexity. To go further, we must look at the Earth itself during the time in question. What did the world truly look like 20,000 years ago? What landscapes did humans inhabit, and what forces shaped their survival? The next chapter will carry us into that ancient world, when ice gripped the continents and seas lay far lower than today, setting the stage for both myth and mystery. Picture the Earth as it was 20,000 years ago. The globe we know today was almost unrecognizable, its outlines reshaped by ice and sea. This was the height of the last glacial maximum, a period when massive sheets of ice smothered the northern continents. North America lay beneath a frozen dome more than 3 kilometers thick in places, stretching from what is now New York across to the Rocky Mountains and northward into the Arctic. Europe was similarly transformed, with ice covering Scandinavia, Germany, Poland, and much of the British Isles. The world's oceans had retreated as water locked itself into the glaciers, lowering global sea levels by more than 120 meters. Where water had once lapped at the edges of continents, dry land stretched outward, exposing vast coastal plains. The climate was harsh and unforgiving. Temperatures in many regions averaged 10 degrees Celsius colder than today. Winds scoured the frozen steppe, carrying dust that drifted across continents. Deserts expanded, forests shrank, and grasslands dominated the mid-latitudes. Rainfall patterns shifted, creating arid belts that forced animal migrations and human movements alike. For much of Eurasia, the landscape was an endless tundra of grasses, scattered shrubs, and herds of megafauna. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats roamed these plains, shaping an ecosystem that seems almost mythological to us now. Humans lived on the edges of this frozen empire. Our species, Homo sapiens, had spread across Africa, Asia, Europe, and into Australia by this time. Small groups survived as hunter-gatherers, adapting with ingenuity to climates that varied from frigid tundra to tropical coasts. In some places, like the sheltered valleys of southern France or the limestone caves of Spain, humans painted vivid scenes of bison, horses, and aurochs on stone walls. In others, like the steppes of Siberia, they fashioned dwellings from mammoth bones, covering them with hides to withstand the cold winds. Along the coasts of Southeast Asia, people likely ventured across narrow seas using simple watercraft, reaching islands that remain home to their descendants today. The population of the entire world was small. Scholars estimate that no more than a few million humans lived on Earth during the last glacial maximum, scattered in isolated bands. Their technologies were simple compared to our own, but astonishing in their effectiveness. Stone blades, bone needles, and fire kept them alive in environments that would kill most of us within hours. They tracked the stars to mark seasons, followed herds across great distances, and remembered landscapes through story and song. Survival required not only tools, but also culture, the passing on of knowledge from one generation to the next. What the world lacked was what we usually define as civilization. There were no cities, no written records, no monumental architecture. The abundance of evidence shows societies that were mobile, small-scale, and flexible, adapting to the challenges of their environments. And yet, this does not make them primitive in the sense we sometimes imagine. Their art demonstrates symbolic thought and aesthetic sensibility. Their migrations prove navigational skills. Their survival in extremes of heat and cold reveals a mastery of knowledge we have only partly recovered. The Ice Age world was not empty of ingenuity. It was filled with human resilience. The geography of the time is one of the most important factors when considering lost histories. Because sea levels were so much lower, the outlines of continents were different. The Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, which today lies beneath shallow seas around Indonesia, was then a vast plain connecting the islands of Borneo, Sumatra, and Java to the Asian mainland. In the north, the land bridge of Beringia linked Siberia to Alaska, allowing humans and animals to cross between continents. In Europe, the English Channel was dry land, connecting Britain to France. Around the world, coastlines extended outward for kilometers, exposing landscapes now hidden beneath the ocean. These plains would have been fertile ground for human habitation, rich in resources and easier to traverse than mountain or ice. To stand on such a world in imagination is to feel both awe and strangeness. The earth was colder, drier, and emptier, yet alive with possibilities. Humanity had spread far, but in small numbers, always vulnerable to the swings of climate. It is within this environment that the question arises. If there had been an earlier civilization, where could it have been? Could it have flourished on those drowned coastal plains, now unreachable to us? Or must we accept that humans of this time were simply not organized at a scale to produce what we call civilization? The next step is to follow the evidence more closely, to examine the shape of continents and seas during the last glacial maximum. By understanding the landscapes on which humans lived, we can begin to weigh the plausibility of whether myths of lost worlds could have emerged from real, drowned lands, or whether they are the echoes of imagination alone. The map of the world 20,000 years ago was utterly different from the one we know today. Imagine standing on the coast of what is now Southeast Asia. Where modern charts show a scattering of islands, there once stretched a continuous landmass, a green expanse known as the Sunda Shelf. Rivers wound through valleys now hidden beneath the Java Sea, their banks home to forests and plains where early humans hunted and gathered. In the north, the Sahul Shelf connected Australia to New Guinea and Tasmania, forming a single great continent. Across Beringia, a vast plain spanned the distance between Siberia and Alaska, creating a corridor for animals and people to move between the old world and the new. These were not minor adjustments, but immense landscapes, larger than modern nations, exposed by the fall in sea levels. The retreat of the oceans was not a slow trickle, but a consequence of water locked into colossal glaciers. Each meter of sea level represented volumes of ice stretching across Canada, Greenland, Scandinavia, and the Alps. As glaciers advanced, they carved valleys and shaped lakes, sculpting the terrain into the outlines we recognize today. The pressure of ice sheets was so great that it depressed the crust of the Earth, creating basins that have only recently rebounded after the melting of ice. This dynamic landscape was not static, and to humans who lived through it, the world must have seemed in constant flux. For hunter-gatherer bands, the exposed coastal plains were magnets. They offered rivers for fishing, fertile soils, and routes for migration. Some of the richest archaeological sites from later periods, such as Jomon settlements in Japan or ancient villages along the Mediterranean, suggest that coasts were prime locations for human activity. If similar settlements existed 20,000 years ago, their remains may now lie beneath layers of sediment and seawater buried under the continental shelves. The fact that so much potential evidence is now underwater explains why the notion of lost civilizations persists. The ocean is vast and difficult to search, and the suspicion lingers that secrets lie hidden on its floor. The migrations of humans during this period were equally remarkable. From Africa, where our species originated, groups had spread into Europe and Asia by 40,000 years ago, and into Australia by at least 60,000 years ago. By the time of the last glacial maximum, humans had reached the edges of Beringia. Whether they crossed into the Americas at this time remains debated, but evidence suggests that people may have entered the New World as early as 18,000 years ago, following herds across the land bridge. These journeys required planning, endurance, and knowledge of landscapes stretching far beyond the view of any single band. The world was also home to other human species, though by 20,000 years ago, most had vanished. Neanderthals had disappeared from Europe more than 10,000 years earlier, though their genes lived on within modern humans through interbreeding. Denisovans, known from genetic traces and a handful of fossils in Asia, had already faded as well, though their legacy persists most strongly in populations of Oceania. By the time of the last glacial maximum, Homo sapiens stood alone, but we carried within us the legacies of those earlier cousins, both in biology and in cultural knowledge, inherited across encounters. What stands out most from this picture is scale. Human groups were small, perhaps 20 to 50 individuals in a band, tied by kinship and mutual survival. Larger gatherings may have occurred seasonally, where bands met to share resources, exchange mates, and celebrate with rituals. These events left behind hints in the archaeological record, concentrations of stone tools, hearths and ornaments, crafted from shells or ivory. They show us that networks existed, even if fragile and temporary, binding together scattered communities across regions. But the leap from such gatherings to the scale of cities or global trade remains vast. Climate dictated much of human existence. Vast areas of the northern hemisphere were uninhabitable, locked in ice or tundra, too barren to support large groups. In the tropics, monsoon patterns shifted, creating droughts in regions that are now lush. Africa's Great Lakes shrank, deserts expanded, and coastal resources became more important than ever. Such pressures limited where people could thrive. The total population of the Earth at the time may have been no greater than that of a single modern metropolis. That scarcity makes the idea of a global civilization difficult to reconcile with evidence. for large-scale societies require numbers, specialization, and surpluses that hunter-gatherer life rarely produces. And yet, the ingenuity of these people cannot be underestimated. They developed tailored clothing to survive extreme cold, crafted boats to cross waters, and created symbolic art that still stirs us today. In places like the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet in France, paintings of animals stretch across the walls in compositions that reveal not just survival but imagination. These were people who understood the rhythms of migration, the cycles of the stars, and the properties of stone and bone. They were not primitive in mind, even if their societies lacked the structures we associate with civilization. This world, then, was both familiar and alien. Familiar because humans laughed, hunted, sang, and mourned as we do. Alien because the continents and seas themselves were different, the climate harsher, and the challenges immense. To understand whether a forgotten civilization could have existed, we must weigh these realities against the myths. Could scattered bands have organized into something larger, hidden from us by the rising seas? Or do the patterns of environment and population make such an idea untenable? The answer lies in the evidence and in the landscapes still waiting to be explored beneath the waves. The human story at the time of the last glacial maximum is one of endurance. In Europe, families huddled in caves or built shelters from mammoth bones, lining them with hides to keep out the icy winds. In Siberia, hunters followed reindeer and bison across endless tundra, using stone-tipped spears and traps to bring down prey that outweighed them many times over. In Africa, groups sought water and shade as deserts expanded, navigating with knowledge handed down in oral traditions. In Australia, people tended fire-stick landscapes, using controlled burns to shape ecosystems in ways that sustained their food sources. Across the globe, survival was not only physical, but cultural. People shared myths, songs, and rituals that reinforced memory and identity in a world of uncertainty. One of the striking features of this period is the richness of symbolic life. The caves of Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet in Europe are adorned with breathtaking images painted between 30,000 and 15,000 years ago. Horses, aurochs, mammoths, and abstract signs swirl in ochre and charcoal across the walls. These are not random doodles. They display deliberate composition, knowledge of perspective, and a reverence for the animals that sustained life. Scholars debate whether these were part of rituals, hunting magic, or storytelling, but their presence testifies to minds as capable of creativity and abstraction as ours. Venus figurines carved from stone and ivory, with exaggerated features, suggest a symbolic engagement with fertility and identity. Such objects remind us that even without cities or writing, humans 20,000 years ago carried within them the full spark of modern thought. Still, the world was constrained. To imagine a global civilization requires surpluses, trade, and coordination on scales that the Ice Age environment did not easily allow. Small populations scattered across vast distances, struggling to adapt to shifting climates, would have found it difficult to organize beyond local networks. The evidence supports this. Tools from this period show continuity in regional traditions, but not the hallmarks of widespread exchange across continents. Languages, if we could hear them, were surely diverse and fragmented. Connections existed, but they were fragile, shaped by migration routes and resource availability rather than by structured governance or planned cities. The lowered seas, however, remain a tantalizing unknown. Entire shelves of land, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, were once home to ecosystems and potentially to human groups. When the glaciers began to melt, the oceans rose slowly but relentlessly, swallowing those plains over thousands of years. Any settlements that might have existed there now lie beneath layers of sand and silt, inaccessible to casual observation. Modern technology has only begun to explore these drowned landscapes. Side-scan sonar, submersibles, and deep-sea drilling reveal fragments of what once was, river channels now submerged, fossilized forests, and occasional artifacts of human presence. Though nothing so far suggests great cities, the possibility lingers that traces of habitation lie waiting in places rarely searched. It is here that the myths regain their power. A people watching their land sink beneath encroaching seas would surely tell stories of catastrophe. Generations later, those stories would transform into legends of worlds lost to the ocean. The universality of flood myths across cultures from Mesopotamia to India, from Polynesia to the Americas, suggests that such experiences were not rare. Rising seas, storms, and glacial melt could erase entire coastlines within the memory of a few generations. To survivors, it would feel as though the world itself was punishing them, swallowing their homes and sanctuaries. The echo of that trauma may still reverberate in the stories we inherit today, yet it is crucial to draw the boundary between myth and material. Archaeology finds no evidence of writing, metallurgy, or large-scale architecture from this time. There is no indication of centralized states or empires. What we see instead are resilient, adaptable groups using stone, bone, and wood to shape their world. Their achievements lie not in forgotten skyscrapers, but in the ability to endure climatic extremes, to migrate across continents, and to leave behind art that speaks across millennia. Their world was not less than ours, but different, shaped by conditions that demanded mobility and cooperation at small scales rather than urban ambition. The image of Earth 20,000 years ago is therefore a paradox. On one hand, it seems an unlikely setting for civilization as we define it. On the other, it contains vast blind spots, drowned under oceans and buried beneath ice, where traces of human activity might still remain undiscovered. This tension sustains the question. Perhaps the myths exaggerate, but perhaps they preserve fragments of memory from coastlines lost when the seas rose. To evaluate that possibility, we must look to the ocean itself. For if any traces of forgotten worlds exist, they are most likely hidden beneath the waves. And so, the stage is set for our next journey. We leave behind the frozen plains and enter the depths, searching among the drowned landscapes for signs of structures, settlements, or monuments that could change our understanding of prehistory. The seas may yet conceal lost chapters of the human story, waiting to be read. The ocean is a keeper of secrets. For most of human history, it has been the ultimate frontier, a realm both feared and worshipped. Its depths conceal mountains, trenches, and plains greater in scale than anything on land. It is also where memory and myth converge most powerfully. The idea of civilizations lost to the sea has captivated us, because the sea itself is the great eraser. Storms erase coasts, tides erase tracks, and rising waters erase entire landscapes. If any place could conceal forgotten chapters of human history, it is here, beneath the waves. Among the most famous of the alleged underwater ruins is the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan. In 1986, a diver exploring the waters near Yonaguni Island encountered a formation unlike any he had seen before. Massive stone terraces stepped down into the seabed, with sharp angles, flat surfaces, and what seemed to be stairways and platforms. Photographs of the site quickly circulated, provoking debate. Was this a man-made structure, perhaps the remains of an ancient city sunk during the Ice Age, or was it a natural formation sculpted by geology and currents? Supporters of the man-made theory point to what appear to be right-angled edges, symmetrical terraces, and even features resembling carvings. They suggest that Yonaguni may date back to at least 10,000 years ago, when sea levels were lower and the area was dry land. Such a date would place it thousands of years before the pyramids or Stonehenge, implying a civilization far older than mainstream archaeology allows. Some even claim that the formation could be linked to the legendary lost continent of Mu. Skeptics, however, argue that Yonaguni is entirely natural. The island sits within an area of sandstone and mudstone that naturally fractures along plains, creating flat surfaces and angular shapes. Underwater erosion and seismic activity could explain the steps and terraces. Geologists who have studied the site emphasize that the structures show no signs of tool marks or human shaping. To them, Yonaguni is a fascinating natural formation that only appears artificial because human brains are wired to see patterns and architecture where none exist. The debate has never been fully resolved, but most archaeologists lean toward the natural explanation. Even so, the allure of Yonaguni persists. The images of its massive terraces stir the imagination. Divers swim through what looks like a drowned city, and storytellers breathe life into the possibility that it is a remnant of an Ice Age culture now forgotten. Yonaguni exemplifies the tension at the heart of this entire mystery. The difference between geology and archaeology is sometimes blurred by the sea, and in that blur, myth thrives. On the opposite side of Asia, in the waters off India's Gujarat coast, lies another site shrouded in mystery: the submerged ruins near Dwarka. Dwarka is a city sacred in Hindu tradition, said to have been founded by the god Krishna. Ancient texts describe it as a magnificent city that was swallowed by the sea after Krishna's departure. In 2001, marine archaeologists announced the discovery of stone structures beneath the Gulf of Khambhat at depths of more than 30 meters. Sonar images revealed geometric patterns, and divers recovered artifacts, including pottery shards and stone tools. To some, this was proof that the legends of Dwarka described real events. If the structures were indeed the remains of a city, then they might date back at least 9,000 years, far older than the Indus Valley civilization. Such a discovery would push back the origins of Indian civilization by millennia, suggesting continuity between myth and archaeology. But here too, skepticism arose. Critics noted that the Gulf of Khambhat is a highly dynamic environment, with strong currents and heavy sedimentation. Some of the supposed structures may be natural formations shaped by the seabed's geology. The artifacts, when analyzed, dated not to 9,000 years but to around 4,000 years ago, consistent with known civilizations of the region. Archaeologists caution that, while the finds are intriguing, they do not prove the existence of a vast ancient city. The Gulf remains poorly explored, and the evidence so far is too ambiguous to overturn established timelines. Still, the story of Dwarka is compelling because it links directly to cultural memory. For millions of Hindus, the idea of a city swallowed by the sea is not a speculative legend, but a deeply rooted tradition. Whether or not the underwater ruins belong to the Dwarka of myth, they represent how archaeology and mythology can overlap. Even a natural formation can take on extraordinary meaning when viewed through the lens of cultural storytelling. Across the world, in the Caribbean, another formation has fueled claims of lost civilizations: the Bimini Road. In 1968, divers off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas discovered a line of massive limestone blocks, arranged in what appeared to be a road or wall, stretching for hundreds of meters. The discovery coincided with predictions by the famous psychic Edgar Cayce, who claimed that remnants of Atlantis would be found near Bimini. To believers, the Bimini Road was confirmation. They imagined it as a seawall, a pier, or even a ceremonial roadway built by Atlanteans before their empire sank. Geologists, however, interpret the Bimini Road differently. The limestone blocks are beach rock, naturally formed by the cementing of sand and shells. Over time, natural fractures can create the appearance of neatly cut blocks, and wave action can align them into rows. Studies of the rock have dated it to only a few thousand years old, far too recent to be a remnant of Atlantis or any Ice Age culture. From a scientific perspective, the Bimini Road is another case of natural processes producing patterns that humans interpret as artificial. And yet, photographs of the Bimini blocks remain striking. To the human eye, they look undeniably architectural, like paving stones or foundation walls. The mind leaps to the possibility of intention behind them, even when evidence points to geology. Once again, the sea provides a canvas on which we project our longing for hidden histories. These three sites, Yonaguni, Dwarka, and the Bimini Road, show the powerful mix of natural formations, myth, and human imagination. In each case, the most likely explanation is geological, not archaeological. Yet in each case, the debate continues, because the ocean itself keeps full certainty out of reach. Beneath the waves, every angle and shadow can be interpreted two ways: as the artistry of Earth or the handiwork of a forgotten people. The fascination with underwater mysteries is heightened by the limits of exploration. Unlike ruins on land, which can be studied with excavation, dating, and survey, Underwater sites present enormous challenges. Visibility is poor, currents shift sediment constantly, and access requires specialized equipment. Most dives are short and dangerous, limited by depth and oxygen. The sea does not yield its secrets easily, and that difficulty itself fuels speculation. What lies just beyond reach is always the most tempting to imagine. Take Yonaguni, for example. Divers describe swimming along its terraces as though moving through an amphitheater of stone. Photographs capture sharp right angles and flat surfaces that seem too precise for nature. Yet geologists remind us that sandstone fractures cleanly, and tectonic activity in the region produces steps and blocks that mimic architecture. They point out that without evidence of tool marks, carvings, or cultural artifacts, the structure cannot be confidently assigned to human hands. But for those inclined to believe, the absence of such evidence is reinterpreted as further mystery. Perhaps erosion erased the proof, or perhaps the civilization was so ancient that only its foundations remain. In Dwarka, the mixture of archaeology and tradition complicates the picture even further. When explorers reported structures beneath the Gulf of Kambat, many were quick to link them to the Krishna legends. Here was a chance, they believed, to prove that myth was history. But sediment samples and carbon dating told another story, one more modest but no less fascinating, that humans occupied the region thousands of years ago, leaving traces of pottery and tools. The scale of the site does not support the existence of a great city 9,000 years old, but it does confirm human presence and activity where once only myth spoke. To believers, even that partial overlap is enough to sustain the conviction that the ancient texts preserve real memories. The Bimini Road offers a parallel lesson. Geologists who examined the site concluded that it was natural beach rock, fractured and aligned by currents. Their studies dated the blocks to about 2,000 years ago, far too recent to be connected to Ice Age civilizations. Yet the photographs spread widely, bolstered by the dramatic prediction of Edgar Cayce, and to many observers the site looked deliberately constructed. The mythic frame of Atlantis overrode geological caution. Even today, the Bimini Road is cited in documentaries and speculative books as proof of a hidden past. The pattern is clear. Natural formations that resemble human structures are interpreted through the lens of myth. Once linked to stories of Atlantis, Mu, or other lost lands, they become magnets for belief. Scientific caution rarely carries the same emotional weight as a tale of drowned empires. The ocean, already a realm of awe and danger, amplifies this effect. When a diver descends into shadow and sees massive stones arranged in rows, the experience is visceral. The mind does not easily accept that nature alone could shape such patterns. Scientists approach these mysteries with tools designed to strip away illusion. They measure fracture lines, compare rock samples, analyze currents, and date artifacts through radiocarbon analysis. Their aim is not to dismiss wonder, but to separate geology from archaeology. In some cases, such as the Gulf of Kambat, this has revealed traces of human presence that deepen our understanding of migration and settlement. In others, such as Bimini, it has shown that the stones are younger and simpler than the myths suggest. Yet the tension never fully resolves, because the ocean allows just enough uncertainty to keep imagination alive. Why does myth cling so tightly to the sea? Perhaps it is because the sea has always been both giver and taker. It provides food, transport and trade, yet it also swallows ships, drowns coasts, and erases lands. For ancient peoples, the sea's destructive power was inescapable. When waters rose, when storms destroyed villages, or when tsunamis swept away entire shores, the survivors would carry stories of what was lost. Over generations, those stories would grow into legends of cities consumed by the waves. Even if the details shifted, the essence remained. The sea takes as well as it gives. The persistence of these legends, combined with the tantalizing appearance of underwater structures, creates fertile ground for speculation about lost civilizations. Every new discovery of submerged ruins, even when firmly dated to a few thousand years ago, renews hope that something older still lies waiting. The sea becomes a stage on which archaeology and imagination perform side by side, each amplifying the other. In that performance, the line between myth and history blurs, and the possibility of forgotten worlds remains alive. As we consider these sites, the evidence points to natural origins or modest human settlements rather than vast empires. Yet the fascination persists because the question is not only about geology, but about identity. To believe in lost civilizations is to believe that humanity's story is deeper and grander than we know. It is to hope that beneath the waves lie answers to questions we have not yet learned to ask. This hope, whether grounded or not, ensures that Yonaguni, Dwarka, and Bimini will continue to inspire divers, researchers, and dreamers for generations to come. But to move beyond speculation, we must look carefully at the archaeological record. What has actually been found beneath the seas? What can be verified? And what remains only in imagination? These questions guide the final section of this chapter as we weigh the evidence for underwater mysteries and prepare to move toward the greatest shock to modern archaeology, the discovery of Göbekli Tepe. Beneath the surface of the seas lie landscapes both familiar and alien, places that once were plains, rivers, and coasts where humans surely lived, now drowned beneath meters of salt water. These hidden realms invite us to imagine that entire civilizations might rest there undisturbed, waiting to be rediscovered. Yet the truth, as revealed through careful study, is both more modest and more profound. The ocean conceals much, but it does not easily yield empires. At Yonaguni, the terraces of sandstone remind us that geology often masquerades as architecture. Erosion and fracture lines can mimic stairways, platforms, and walls, especially when seen through the eyes of divers searching for patterns. The human mind is predisposed to find structure, to read intention in the random. Our ancestors saw faces in clouds, gods in storms, and spirits in rivers. We too see pyramids in rock formations beneath the waves. What we bring to a place often shapes what we see. At Dwarka, the blending of archaeology and myth shows another side of the puzzle. The discovery of stone tools and artifacts beneath the Gulf of Khambhat confirms that humans have long lived and thrived in coastal India. But the leap from a modest settlement to the legendary city of Krishna is one of imagination rather than evidence. Yet even this overlap is important, for it reveals how myths may preserve echoes of real experiences. A coastal community drowned by the sea could indeed become a story retold as divine punishment or cosmic destiny. In this way, Dwarka reminds us that myth and archaeology are not enemies, but parallel ways of remembering. The Bimini Road illustrates the power of coincidence. Natural slabs of beach rock, aligned by waves, created the perfect illusion of a road or seawall. The timing of its discovery, so close to Edgar Cayce's prediction of Atlantis near Bimini, ensured that it would become legendary. Scientific studies show it is only a few thousand years old and entirely natural. Yet to those who swim along its stones, the impression of human intention is strong. The sense of walking through history beneath the waves is irresistible. What unites these cases is not proof of a lost global civilization, but the resilience of human longing for one. The ocean is vast, covering more than 70% of the planet. Its depths remain largely unexplored. That unexplored immensity allows myths to thrive. Each unusual formation, each sonar anomaly, becomes a possible Atlantis. Each artifact recovered from a shifting seabed hints at the chance of something more. The very difficulty of underwater archaeology ensures that mystery will never be fully dispelled. Yet caution is necessary. Civilizations leave behind more than stones. They leave networks of trade, distinctive artifacts, and layers of occupation. They produce art, writing, metallurgy, and agriculture. None of these signatures has been found beneath the seas in contexts older than the earliest known civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, or the Indus Valley. The absence of such evidence speaks loudly. It does not erase the possibility of small settlements lost to rising seas, but it weighs heavily against the existence of a global empire erased without trace. Still, the fascination is not misplaced. The drowned landscapes of the continental shelves are essential to our story. For tens of thousands of years, they were home to human communities who hunted, fished, and built their lives on lands that no longer exist. Their traces remain to be found, and future technology may one day reveal settlements that expand our understanding of prehistory. Even if these are not the grand cities of legend, They will remind us that much of human history is hidden, waiting beneath the waves. The ocean, then, is not only a metaphor for mystery, but a real archive, difficult to read but filled with pages we have barely opened. Its role in shaping myth cannot be overstated. Rising seas after the Ice Age transformed coastlines across the world, erasing habitats and forcing migrations. The survivors of those changes would have told stories of lands that vanished and homes swallowed by water. Over generations, those memories became myths of great floods, sunken kingdoms, and civilizations destroyed. The sea gave birth to some of the most enduring stories humanity has ever told. As we leave the underwater world behind, we turn to a discovery on land that shook the foundations of archaeology. For centuries, scholars believed that complex societies could not exist before the rise of farming. Then, on a hill in southeastern Turkey, excavators uncovered a site 12,000 years old that defied those assumptions. Stone pillars carved with animals and symbols, arranged in vast enclosures, revealed a monument to a way of life we had never imagined. Göbekli Tepe showed that the human story is stranger, older, and more complex than once thought. If myths of lost civilizations are powerful, it is because they touch a truth, that our ancestors were capable of wonders long before history officially began. High on a hill in southeastern Turkey lies a mound that for centuries appeared unremarkable. Shepherds grazed flocks on its slopes, farmers ploughed its soil. The locals called it Göbekli Tepe, the belly hill. To the casual eye, it was just another rise in a landscape scattered with ruins from the Bronze Age and later. But beneath that mound lay something extraordinary, a discovery that would force scholars to rewrite one of the most fundamental assumptions about human history. In the mid-1990s, a team led by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating the site. What emerged from the soil stunned the academic world. Massive stone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in great circles and ovals, carvings of animals, lions, snakes, scorpions, boars, birds covered their surfaces. Abstract symbols, hands folded against torsos, even humanoid forms appeared in relief. The scale and artistry of the site were unlike anything expected from that period. Radiocarbon dating revealed that Göbekli Tepe was more than 12,000 years old, built at the very end of the last ice age, millennia before Stonehenge or the pyramids. This was a shock because it contradicted the prevailing model of human development. Archaeology had long assumed that monumental architecture emerged only after the rise of agriculture. The logic was simple. Farming created surpluses. Surpluses supported larger populations, and larger populations enabled the construction of temples and monuments. Hunter-gatherers, by contrast, were thought to live in small mobile bands, too busy with survival to build anything permanent. Yet Göbekli Tepe proved otherwise. Here was a monumental site built by hunter-gatherers before farming had even begun. The implications were enormous. If hunter-gatherers could organize the labor, planning, and symbolic vision required to construct Göbekli Tepe, then our understanding of prehistory had to change. These were not simple people scraping by on the margins of survival. They were capable of architecture, ritual, and art at a scale previously unimaginable. Schmidt himself called Göbekli Tepe the world's first temple, a place where people gathered for ceremonies that bound communities together. Its builders carried limestone pillars from quarries, carved them with flint tools, and arranged them in enclosures that must have required coordination across many groups. The site also forced a reversal of the established sequence of development. Instead of agriculture leading to religion and social complexity, perhaps it was religion or symbolic gathering that led to agriculture. People may have come together at Göbekli Tepe for rituals and feasts, creating the need for more reliable food sources, which in turn spurred the domestication of plants and animals. If so, the spiritual impulse preceded the agricultural revolution, a reversal that challenged decades of orthodoxy. Göbekli Tepe also raised questions about memory. How could such an extraordinary site have been built, used, and then deliberately buried? Archaeologists found that the enclosures were intentionally filled with rubble and covered over, layer upon layer. Whether this was an act of ritual closure, abandonment, or protection remains uncertain. The result, however, was preservation. Unlike most ancient structures that crumble over time, Göbekli Tepe's deliberate burial shielded it for millennia, leaving the pillars and carvings remarkably intact when rediscovered. For those drawn to the idea of lost civilizations, Göbekli Tepe became a touchstone. Here, at the dawn of the Holocene, humans were already creating monuments that rival anything that came later in imagination. If such a site could exist 12,000 years ago, why not 16,000 or 20,000? Could Göbekli Tepe be a fragment of knowledge inherited from an earlier, forgotten culture? Mainstream archaeology resists such leaps, but the question is difficult to silence once raised. Göbekli Tepe is, in truth, a gift and a challenge. It demonstrates that our ancestors were far more capable than once believed. It shows that symbolic thought, ritual, and large-scale cooperation existed long before the first written records. But it also challenges us to ask how much more remains hidden. If this site, so monumental and so ancient, lay buried and unknown until the late 20th century, what else might still lie undiscovered beneath soil or sea? The excavation of Göbekli Tepe continues today, slowly revealing new enclosures and carvings, each more intricate than the last. Every season of discovery adds detail to a picture we are only beginning to understand. And with each discovery, the lines between myth and history blur just a little more. For the first time, archaeology itself has shown that humanity's story is not as simple nor as linear as once thought. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe rise from the ground like sentinels of another age. Some stand in pairs at the center of circular enclosures, taller and more massive than the surrounding stones. Archaeologists believe these twin monoliths were focal points of ritual, perhaps representing deities, ancestors, or mythic beings. They are T-shaped, with crossbars at the top, and their flat faces bear carvings of arms and hands, suggesting they may represent stylized human figures. Around them, smaller pillars form rings, creating spaces that may have been used for gatherings or ceremonies. The scale of construction is astonishing when we consider the tools available at the time. The builders of Göbekli Tepe had only flint and obsidian blades, hammerstones, and wooden levers. Yet they quarried limestone blocks weighing up to 20 tons, transported them over hundreds of meters, and erected them with precision. This required not only physical strength but also organization and planning. Teams must have coordinated to carve, haul, and lift the stones into place. The effort suggests social cooperation on a scale previously unimagined for hunter-gatherers. The carvings that adorn the pillars are no less remarkable. Lions, leopards, foxes, snakes, scorpions, vultures, boars, cranes, and wild cattle appear in relief. Some figures are naturalistic, others abstract, but all reveal a mastery of artistic skill. Certain animals repeat across multiple enclosures, perhaps carrying symbolic or spiritual meaning. One pillar shows a vulture holding what appears to be a human head, a motif that recalls practices of excarnation, where bodies were exposed to scavenging birds as part of funerary rituals. Other carvings depict abstract symbols that may represent constellations, tribal emblems, or mythic concepts. Whatever their exact meaning, they reveal a symbolic system far beyond mere decoration. To stand among these stones, even in their fragmentary state, is to sense the weight of intention. This was not a shelter, not a home, but a place set apart. Archaeologists believe Göbekli Tepe was a ceremonial center, a gathering place where scattered bands came together for rituals that reaffirmed their bonds. Here, stories were told, feasts shared, alliances forged, and the cosmos itself interpreted through stone and symbol. The enclosures may have served as theaters of myth, places where communities enacted their understanding of life, death, and the forces of the world. What makes Göbekli Tepe even more extraordinary is its antiquity. At more than 12,000 years old, it predates agriculture by millennia. The people who built it were still hunters of gazelle and gatherers of wild plants. They had no permanent villages, no herds of domesticated animals, no fields of wheat or barley. And yet, They carved and raised pillars larger than anything that would appear again until the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia thousands of years later. This overturns the old sequence in which farming led to surplus, surplus led to specialization, and specialization led to monuments. At Göbekli Tepe, the monument seems to have come first. This reversal forces us to reconsider what drove human progress. Perhaps it was not hunger or necessity alone, but imagination, ritual, and belief that first inspired cooperation on a grand scale. If people were willing to organize to build ceremonial spaces, they would need reliable food to sustain the gatherings. This may have created the pressure to experiment with cultivating wild cereals and domesticating animals. Religion or ritual, in this sense, may have been the spark that ignited the agricultural revolution, not its byproduct. The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe adds to its mystery. Each enclosure, after being used, was filled with rubble and sealed. This was done repeatedly, creating layers of structures beneath the mound. Whether the burial was an act of reverence, closure, or necessity is unknown. It ensured, however, that the site survived in remarkable condition, waiting for rediscovery. To some, this suggests a cyclical view of sacred space, where enclosures were created, used, and then ritually interred, making way for new ones above. To others, it raises questions of memory and intentional concealment, as though the builders sought to protect or hide their work from the future. The implications ripple outward. If hunter-gatherers at Göbekli Tepe could achieve such feats, what else might have been possible? Were there other centers of ritual and architecture now lost beneath soil or sea? Could myths of lost civilizations echo real achievements of cultures that flourished briefly at the end of the Ice Age? Archaeologists caution that Göbekli Tepe does not prove the existence of a global civilization. It was likely a regional phenomenon, created by groups in the Fertile Crescent, but it does show that our assumptions about what humans could accomplish at that time were deeply flawed. Göbekli Tepe also challenges the way we think about civilization itself. If we define civilization by writing, farming, and cities, then Göbekli Tepe does not qualify. But if we define it by art, ritual, and social cooperation, then it is as much a civilization as those that came later. The stones stand as evidence that complexity is not measured only in crops and cities, but also in the human capacity to imagine and to build in service of ideas. In this sense, Göbekli Tepe is not an anomaly but a reminder. Human history is not a straight line of progress from simplicity to complexity. It is a web of experiments, failures, and surprising achievements. Our ancestors were not waiting passively for agriculture to unlock civilization. They were already shaping their world in ways that defy our expectations. To understand this, we must accept that the past was stranger and richer than the models we once imposed upon it. Göbekli Tepe leaves us with both clarity and uncertainty. It proves that monumental architecture existed thousands of years before we thought possible, but it leaves unanswered the question of why. What beliefs, myths, or visions drove its builders to carve stone from bedrock and arrange it into sacred circles? What compelled them to invest so much effort into a place that, in material terms, gave no food, no shelter, and no wealth? The answers may be lost, but the stones themselves continue to speak, whispering that human imagination is as ancient as humanity itself. Göbekli Tepe stands today not only as an archaeological site, but as a symbol of humility. It reminds us that our frameworks for history are provisional, always subject to change when new evidence emerges. For decades, scholars taught that civilization began with farming in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 years ago. Then came cities, writing, and monuments. But the stones on the hill above the plains of Turkey overturned that neat sequence. They showed that imagination, art, and ritual can precede farming, that the seeds of civilization may lie in the human spirit rather than in the field. The discovery forces us to reconsider what we mean when we speak of civilization. If it requires agriculture, bureaucracy, and cities, then Göbekli Tepe lies outside its borders. But if civilization means shared symbols, monumental works, and social cooperation, then the builders of Göbekli Tepe were among the earliest civilizers of the human story. Their achievement was not an accident nor a fluke, but a deliberate expression of culture that demanded knowledge of stone, planning, and ritual. This alone is enough to push back the horizon of human possibility by thousands of years. It also sharpens the question that runs through every myth of a lost world. If hunter-gatherers could raise monuments 12,000 years ago, what else might have been possible before then? Could groups elsewhere have experimented with architecture, seafaring, or astronomy that left only faint traces behind? Archaeologists respond with caution. No material evidence supports such claims. Yet the very existence of Göbekli Tepe shows how much remains unknown. Until the 1990s, no one imagined such a site could exist. What other surprises wait in unexcavated mounds or submerged plains? For alternative theorists, Göbekli Tepe has become a cornerstone. Writers such as Graham Hancock argue that the site reflects inherited knowledge passed down from a forgotten Ice Age civilization that perished in floods at the end of the Pleistocene. To mainstream scholars, such claims are speculation without evidence. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were the same hunter-gatherers whose tools and remains surround the site. Yet even the skeptics acknowledge that the discovery stretches the limits of what we thought possible. It leaves open the unsettling truth that our models of the past may be too narrow. The carvings themselves fuel the sense of enigma. Some researchers suggest that certain motifs, like the vulture holding a sphere or the alignment of animal figures, might encode astronomical events such as comets or constellations. Others caution against reading too much into ambiguous symbols. Still, the possibility that Ice Age peoples embedded cosmic knowledge into stone resonates with the idea of ancient wisdom preserved through myth. If nothing else, the stones show that symbolic thought was central to their world. Whether they tracked the stars or simply honored the spirits of animals, they left a record of minds grappling with mysteries of existence as profound as our own. The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe may be the most haunting element of all. Why would people invest such labor, only to cover their work with rubble? Some suggest cycles of ritual closure, others speculate on social or environmental upheaval. To later generations, the hill appeared only as a mound, its secrets hidden for thousands of years. Perhaps this is fitting. The builders concealed their sacred spaces so that we, in another age, might uncover them with awe. In doing so, they handed us a reminder that history is not a straight road, but a labyrinth, with forgotten chambers waiting to be revealed. Göbekli Tepe does not prove the existence of a global civilization 20,000 years ago, but it proves that human potential was underestimated. It shows that complexity, cooperation, and imagination flourished long before the official dawn of civilization. It teaches us that myths of lost worlds, while not literally true, may echo a deeper truth, that human history is fragile, episodic, and easily erased. As we leave Göbekli Tepe, we carry forward its lesson. The past is full of surprises, and certainty is dangerous. Just as the stones on the Turkish hill rewrote our understanding, so too might other discoveries shift the ground beneath our feet. The next great mystery lies not only in monuments but in the stories of floods. Nearly every culture preserves tales of deluge, of waters rising to swallow lands and peoples. From Mesopotamia to India, from the Bible to indigenous traditions across the globe, the flood myth is universal. Was this simply a metaphor for human fear of chaos, or was it the memory of real catastrophes at the end of the Ice Age? In the next chapter, we follow the waters. We trace the stories of great floods through myth and through science, exploring how climate shifts 12,000 years ago may have inspired legends that endure to this day. If Göbekli Tepe shows us that imagination and ritual were alive before agriculture, the flood myths show us how memory and trauma can shape the stories we tell of worlds destroyed. Water is both the source of life and the agent of destruction. It nourishes fields, sustains communities, and carries boats across vast distances. Yet it also drowns coasts, sweeps away villages, and erases entire landscapes. No force in nature has shaped human imagination so profoundly as the flood. Across the world, from the earliest written epics to oral traditions preserved in isolated tribes, stories tell of waters rising to consume the earth. These myths are not identical, yet they echo each other in striking ways. They speak of divine punishment, of human folly, and of survival through a chosen few. They speak of a world destroyed and remade. The oldest written flood story comes from Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where some of the first cities arose. The Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, preserved in fragments of clay tablets, tells of a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humankind. Ziusudra is warned by a deity to build a boat and preserve life. He survives the deluge, offers sacrifices, and is granted immortality. Later, in the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, this story appears again in the account of Utnapishtim, who tells Gilgamesh how he built a massive vessel, saved animals, and endured the flood. The parallels with the biblical story of Noah are unmistakable. In Genesis 2, God decides to destroy humankind for its corruption, but spares Noah, who builds an ark to preserve his family and the creatures of the earth. In India, the flood story is told in the Satapatha Brahmana and later in the Mahabharata and Puranas. Here the survivor is Manu, warned by a fish who is in fact the god Vishnu. Manu builds a boat and ties it to the fish, who leads him through the waters until they recede. Like Ziusudra and Noah, Manu emerges into a renewed world and becomes the ancestor of humankind. In Greece, the myth takes the form of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survive a flood sent by Zeus to cleanse the earth. In Native American traditions, tribes from the Pacific Northwest, the Great Plains, and the Southwest preserve stories of waters rising, of rafts or canoes carrying survivors to mountaintops, of animals helping to remake the earth after the deluge. In Polynesia, chants speak of islands swallowed by waves, of gods who punish humans with water, and of ancestors who survived by fleeing to higher ground. The universality of these myths is striking. They arise in regions separated by oceans, among peoples with no contact, and yet the pattern repeats. Divine warning, survival through a chosen individual or family, destruction by water, and the rebirth of life. Why should this story appear everywhere? Some scholars argue that it reflects the common human experience of flooding. Rivers overflow, monsoons overwhelm, and storms devastate coastlines. For early societies living close to water, such events would have been catastrophic. Oral traditions magnify such memories, transforming a devastating local flood into a cosmic one. Over centuries, the story of a community's disaster becomes the myth of the world's destruction. Others argue that the flood myths may preserve memory of real, global events. At the end of the Ice Age, around 12,000 years ago, the Earth underwent dramatic climatic changes. Glaciers melted, seas rose by more than 100 meters, and coastlines shifted dramatically. For communities living on those coasts, the rising water would have been an existential crisis. Valleys filled, plains vanished, and islands shrank. To those who experienced it, the change may have seemed sudden and apocalyptic. The trauma of losing ancestral lands to the sea could easily become myth. Over generations, the memory of rising waters might be told as a single great flood, the punishment of gods, or the reset of creation. The persistence of flood myths suggests that they tap into a universal fear of chaos. Water is unpredictable, overwhelming, and beyond human control. It can transform fertile land into wasteland in hours. In this sense, flood stories are metaphors for the fragility of human order, yet they may also encode genuine historical events. The Mesopotamian flood story, for example, may be rooted in real floods of the Tigris and Euphrates, which regularly devastated early settlements. The Indian tale of Manu may recall floods caused by monsoon surges. The Greek story of Deucalion may echo memories of Aegean tsunamis triggered by earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. And the stories from the Americas and Polynesia may preserve memories of storms, surges, or rising seas after the Ice Age. Flood myths do more than warn of destruction. They also promise renewal. In nearly every version, the survivors become the ancestors of humanity, repopulating the earth and beginning anew. The flood, though catastrophic, is also cleansing. It resets the world, removes corruption, and restores balance. This dual role, destruction and rebirth, gives the flood myth its enduring power. It tells us that while nature can erase, it also creates space for renewal. Humanity is fragile, but also resilient. As we trace these stories, we must hold two truths at once. On one hand, they are myths, shaped by imagination, culture, and metaphor. On the other, they may preserve echoes of real disasters, floods, and sea level rise that marked the end of the Ice Age. The question is whether those echoes point to more than natural catastrophe. Do they record the drowning of forgotten settlements? Do they preserve memory of cultures swept away by rising seas? Or are they simply the universal story of water's destructive power, told and retold across the ages? The next part of our journey will follow these possibilities more closely, examining the Younger Dryas, a sudden climatic shift around 12,000 years ago that brought chaos to ecosystems, triggered extinctions, and may have inspired the greatest flood stories of all. The end of the Ice Age was not a gentle thaw. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth plunged abruptly into a cold snap known as the Younger Dryas. After millennia of slow warming and glacial retreat, temperatures suddenly dropped again, glaciers advanced, and climates shifted violently. The cause remains debated, but the effect was unmistakable. Ecosystems collapsed, megafauna vanished, and human societies faced turmoil. When the Younger Dryas ended roughly 1,200 years later, the world warmed rapidly, glaciers melted, and seas rose at a pace that transformed coastlines across the planet. For those alive at the time, it must have seemed as though the world itself was convulsing. The Younger Dryas is one of the most dramatic climate events in recent geological history. Ice core data from Greenland shows that temperatures fell by as much as 10 degrees Celsius within decades, a swing so abrupt that it defies our usual sense of geological time. In Europe, forests retreated and tundra returned. In North America, advancing ice reshaped rivers and lakes, diverting waters and altering landscapes. In the Middle East, regions that had begun to green once more fell back into aridity, forcing humans to adapt their survival strategies yet again. Theories about the cause of the Younger Dryas abound. One explanation is that meltwater from retreating glaciers poured into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean currents that carry warmth from the tropics. Another suggests that a comet or asteroid impact triggered fires and atmospheric changes. Whatever the cause, the effect was chaos. For humans living in scattered bands, dependent on fragile ecosystems, these swings would have been catastrophic. Herds of game disappeared, plants shifted ranges, and entire landscapes became hostile. When the Younger Dryas ended around 11,600 years ago, the warming was equally abrupt. Ice sheets melted, releasing torrents of water into the oceans. Sea levels rose rapidly, drowning coasts and transforming the map of the world. In some places, such as the Black Sea, rising water may have surged catastrophically, flooding valleys and creating new seas. In others, entire coastal plains vanished. Across the world, shorelines moved inland by kilometers. Generations who had lived on the coasts watched their homes swallowed by the encroaching sea. For them, the flood was not metaphor, but memory. It is here that myth and climate intersect. Nearly every flood story speaks of waters rising suddenly, of gods or fate sweeping away humanity, of survivors fleeing to mountains or building boats. These echoes align uncannily with the experience of post-Ice Age sea level rise. Though the rise occurred over centuries, within the span of human lives it could seem terrifyingly fast. Villages might be abandoned as waters crept inland each season. Oral traditions would preserve these memories, amplifying them into stories of a single catastrophic flood. Over generations, the narrative would condense into myth, carrying the trauma forward long after the details were forgotten. The Mesopotamian flood story, written thousands of years later, may reflect collective memories of such catastrophes. The same may be true of the Indian tale of Manu, the Greek story of Deucalion, and the flood legends of indigenous peoples around the world. While shaped by culture and belief, they share the common theme of overwhelming water, sudden destruction, and rebirth. In this sense, the myths may encode real events. The great floods that followed the Younger Dryas, when seas rose and the world changed forever. The Younger Dryas also coincides with profound shifts in human society. In the Levant, the Natufian culture, which had begun experimenting with sedentary life and plant cultivation, faced collapse under the return of cold and aridity. Yet when the Younger Dryas ended, they and their descendants pioneered the first true agriculture. It is as though catastrophe spurred innovation. The trauma of instability may have driven humans to seek control over food, leading to domestication of wheat, barley, and animals. In this way, the chaos of the Younger Dryas may have laid the groundwork for the agricultural revolution and the rise of civilization itself. The myths of floods, then, are not only stories of destruction, but of transformation. They reflect both the terror of rising waters and the renewal that followed. For survivors, the flood was the end of one world and the beginning of another. Humanity emerged from the Younger Dryas into a warmer, wetter Holocene, a period of relative stability that allowed agriculture, cities, and monuments like Göbekli Tepe to flourish. The flood myths preserve the memory of crossing that threshold, of enduring chaos to reach renewal. Yet mystery remains. Was the Younger Dryas triggered by natural climate shifts alone, or was it caused by something more dramatic, such as an extraterrestrial impact? Some researchers argue that evidence of nanodiamonds, melt glass, and blackened layers of soil point to a comet or asteroid striking the Earth around 12,800 years ago. If so, the flood myths may not only recall rising seas but also fire from the skies, sudden destruction from above. This controversial hypothesis, known as the Younger Dryas impact theory, suggests that humanity's myths of floods and catastrophe may be rooted in a real global disaster. Whether the cause was comet, current, or climate, the result was the same. The world changed in a geological instant, reshaping landscapes and societies. For those who lived through it, the trauma was preserved in story. And for us, those stories remain, echoing across time, whispering of a flood that once consumed the world. The next part of this chapter will explore these echoes more closely, moving through the evidence for flood legends across cultures and examining whether they can be linked to specific geological events. Do the myths of Mesopotamia, India, and beyond preserve real memories of sea level rise and catastrophe? Or are they archetypes of human imagination, repeated wherever water brings both life and destruction? The stories of the Great Flood linger because they speak to something deeper than simple disaster. They carry the weight of memory, magnified by the power of myth, and they resonate with a universal truth: water changes everything. Whether in Mesopotamia, India, Greece, or among the many indigenous cultures across the Americas and Pacific, the flood is never just a local event. It is portrayed as a world ender, a catastrophe that wipes away all that was and leaves only a remnant to begin again. Scholars often speak of myth as metaphor, yet in the case of floods, the line between metaphor and memory is thin. Archaeological evidence confirms that coastlines vanished as seas rose at the end of the Ice Age. Entire plains disappeared beneath the waters, from the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia to the Doggerland that once linked Britain to mainland Europe. The people who lived in those places would have witnessed the slow but relentless approach of the sea. For them, what we call sea level rise would have been nothing less than the drowning of their world. The stories they carried forward, reshaped by generations, could easily become the myths we know today. Consider the flood story of the Muisca people of Colombia. They told of a god who unleashed torrential rains that flooded valleys and destroyed villages, until another deity intervened to restore balance. In the Pacific Northwest, tribes spoke of a time when waters rose and covered the land, forcing survivors to seek refuge on mountaintops. In Polynesia, chants recall islands swallowed by the sea, ancestors who fled in canoes, and gods whose anger took the form of tidal waves. Across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, oral traditions still tell of lands once above water, now drowned beneath the waves. In some cases, these stories align with areas now known to have been dry land during the Ice Age. These echoes suggest that oral tradition can preserve memory across astonishing spans of time. Modern studies of indigenous storytelling show that myths can encode real events, eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, for thousands of years. It is not unreasonable to imagine that flood stories recall real post-Ice Age catastrophes, filtered through symbolic language and religious interpretation. To the people who told them, the rising seas were not an abstract phenomenon. They were lived reality, trauma preserved in story. But the myths also reveal something about human psychology. The flood is not only destruction, but purification. In nearly every version, the world before the flood is corrupt, sinful, or chaotic. The gods send water to cleanse it, to wipe the slate clean. The survivors are chosen, warned, or fortunate, and they carry forward the seeds of renewal. This archetype, the world destroyed and reborn, echoes across cultures. It reassures us that even in disaster, there is continuity, that life emerges anew from chaos. Science and myth converge in surprising ways. We know from geological evidence that the transition out of the Ice Age was punctuated by chaos. The Younger Dryas brought abrupt cold and then sudden warming. Glaciers collapsed, torrents of meltwater surged into oceans, and seas rose by more than 100 meters. For communities scattered across the world, these events would have been catastrophic. For those who survived, they would have seemed like the judgment of gods. It is no wonder that their descendants carried stories of floods that destroyed the world. And yet, there remains an element of mystery. Was sea level rise alone enough to generate myths of sudden deluge? Or was there an additional spark, a catastrophe so sudden and destructive that it burned itself into memory worldwide? Some scientists argue that around 12,800 years ago, a comet or asteroid impact triggered wildfires, atmospheric dust, and the onset of the Younger Dryas cold snap. If true, this would mean that the myths of fire and flood, of worlds destroyed in both flame and water, may recall not only rising seas but a cosmic disaster. The possibility is controversial, but it speaks to the enduring allure of flood stories. They may encode more than memory. They may point to the deep vulnerability of humanity in the face of sudden catastrophe, whether from climate, ocean, or sky. The universality of the flood myth tells us that we have always lived in the shadow of disaster, and that we have always sought to make sense of it through story. Göbekli Tepe showed us that our ancestors could build monuments long before agriculture. The flood myths show us that they could preserve memory long after events had passed. Together, they remind us that human history is deeper, richer, and stranger than we once thought. As we turn now to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, we confront a provocative question. Did a cosmic catastrophe 12,000 years ago trigger both the climatic chaos of the Younger Dryas and the flood myths that still echo across the world? The Younger Dryas stands as one of the great mysteries of recent Earth history. After millennia of slow warming that began to melt the great Ice Age glaciers, the planet suddenly lurched back into deep cold. Around 12,800 years ago, global temperatures fell abruptly, glaciers advanced once more, and ecosystems collapsed. For centuries, the Earth remained locked in this cold reversal, until just as suddenly, it warmed again. The cause of this dramatic event has puzzled scientists for decades. For much of the 20th century, the dominant explanation was the disruption of ocean currents. As the ice sheets melted, torrents of fresh water poured into the North Atlantic. This influx of cold, fresh water may have disrupted the thermohaline circulation, the conveyor belt of ocean currents that carries warm water northward and helps regulate climate. If the current slowed or stopped, Europe and North America would have been plunged into renewed glaciation. This theory remains widely accepted. But in 2007, a team of researchers put forward a far more dramatic proposal. Known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, it suggests that the sudden cooling was triggered by a comet or asteroid striking the Earth. According to the theory, fragments of a disintegrating comet may have exploded in the atmosphere or impacted ice sheets across North America. The energy released would have ignited wildfires, sent plumes of dust into the atmosphere, and destabilized the climate. In this view, the Younger Dryas was not a natural fluctuation, but the aftermath of a cosmic catastrophe. The evidence presented for this hypothesis is provocative. At sites across North America and Europe, researchers identified a thin, dark layer of sediment dating to around 12,800 years ago. This layer, sometimes called the black mat, contains unusual materials, microscopic diamonds formed under high pressure, tiny metallic spherules, and magnetic grains that resemble the products of intense heat. Such markers, the team argued, could be the result of a cosmic impact. Nanodiamonds, in particular, are often associated with shock events. The black mat also coincides with evidence of widespread wildfires, suggesting that vast landscapes burned at the onset of the Younger Dryas. The timing is striking. The onset of the Younger Dryas aligns closely with the extinction of many large animals in North America, including mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths. It also coincides with the collapse of the Clovis culture, an early hunter-gatherer tradition known for its distinctive stone tools. To proponents of the impact hypothesis, this clustering of events is too much to be coincidence. A cosmic impact could explain climate change, extinctions, and cultural disruption all at once. Critics, however, argue that the evidence is inconsistent. Many of the claimed impact markers, such as nanodiamonds and spherules, can be produced by natural processes unrelated to impacts. The black mat is not found everywhere, and its composition varies from site to site. Radiocarbon dating of some layers has produced conflicting results. To many geologists and archaeologists, the impact hypothesis seems unnecessary. The ocean current disruption model explains the Younger Dryas without invoking a comet. Extraordinary claims, they remind us, require extraordinary evidence. Still, the hypothesis refuses to fade. New discoveries continue to fuel debate. In Greenland, scientists have identified a massive crater beneath the ice, known as Hiawatha. Though its age remains uncertain, some researchers suggest it could date to around the Younger Dryas, potentially providing the smoking gun. Others remain cautious, noting that craters are common and that dating them precisely is difficult. Elsewhere, researchers have reported additional nanodiamond layers and spherules consistent with high-energy events. Each new finding renews the controversy. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is not accepted by mainstream science, but it has captured imagination because it offers a story that aligns with both evidence and myth. A cosmic impact destroying landscapes, wiping out species, and plunging the world into chaos sounds eerily like the catastrophes preserved in oral traditions. To some, this suggests that the flood myths of ancient peoples may not only reflect rising seas, but also memory of fire from the sky. The allure of the hypothesis lies in its ability to unify disparate mysteries: the sudden cooling of climate, the extinctions of megafauna, the collapse of Clovis culture, the black mat layer, and the universality of flood myths. Whether true or not, it has already reshaped how we think about the fragility of civilization. It reminds us that our world is vulnerable not only to gradual change, but to sudden shocks from beyond. As we move deeper into this chapter, we will examine the evidence more closely: the nanodiamonds, the spherules, the charred layers of soil. We will weigh the criticisms and explore why the hypothesis remains controversial. And we will ask the deeper question: if such a catastrophe did occur, what might it mean for our understanding of lost worlds and the origins of human myth? The core of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis rests on unusual materials found in the geological record. Across North America, Europe, and parts of the Middle East, researchers have documented a thin layer of sediment that dates to around 12,800 years ago. This stratum, often just a few centimeters thick, is dark in color and sometimes enriched with carbon, leading scientists to call it the black mat. It coincides with the disappearance of mammoths, mastodons, and other Ice Age megafauna, as well as the decline of the Clovis culture in North America. Proponents of the impact hypothesis argue that the black mat is more than coincidence. Within it, they claim to have found materials that can only be formed by intense heat and pressure: nanodiamonds, metallic spherules, and magnetic grains. Nanodiamonds are crystals of carbon just a few billionths of a meter in size. On Earth, they are often created by shock events, such as meteorite impacts or high-energy explosions. Metallic spherules, tiny round droplets of iron, nickel, and other elements, form when materials are vaporized and then condense while falling through the atmosphere. To the impact team, these markers suggested a cosmic explosion. They also pointed to widespread signs of fire. Charcoal deposits at the same horizon indicated massive burning across continents. To some researchers, this implied continent-scale wildfires ignited by fragments of a comet exploding in the atmosphere. Such an event, they argued, could account for the extinction of many large animals, the disruption of ecosystems, and even the collapse of early human cultures that depended on those ecosystems. The impact hypothesis thus offered a dramatic solution to multiple puzzles at once. It explained the sudden onset of the Younger Dryas cooling. It explained why mammoths and mastodons disappeared within a few centuries. It explained why the Clovis culture, which had thrived in North America, vanished so abruptly. It even explained why flood myths are so common, suggesting that the trauma of cosmic fire and flooding rivers might be preserved in story. But critics have not been silent. Many geologists and archaeologists argue that the evidence is overstated, inconsistent, or misinterpreted. Nanodiamonds, they point out, can be produced by more ordinary processes, such as volcanic eruptions, lightning strikes, or even biological activity. Metallic spherules can form in wildfires or industrial processes, raising questions about contamination. The black mat is not found everywhere, and in many locations it lacks the claimed impact markers. Radiocarbon dating has sometimes placed the layers slightly earlier or later than the onset of the Younger Dryas, weakening the correlation. There is also skepticism about the scale of the supposed fires. While charcoal layers do exist, some researchers argue they reflect regional fires rather than global conflagrations. Large animals may have declined gradually due to human hunting and ecological stress, not instant annihilation. The disappearance of the Clovis culture, too, may reflect adaptation and dispersal rather than sudden extinction. From this perspective, the impact hypothesis seems like an unnecessary complication. The established model of meltwater disrupting ocean currents, combined with hunting and climate stress, suffices to explain the evidence without invoking a comet. Despite these criticisms, the hypothesis remains stubbornly alive. Its proponents continue to gather data, reporting new sites where nanodiamonds or spherules appear. In 2018, the announcement of a massive crater beneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland reignited debate. If the crater were indeed 12,800 years old, it would provide strong support for the impact theory. But dating craters under ice is notoriously difficult, and subsequent studies have suggested that the Hiawatha crater may be older. The smoking gun remains elusive. The controversy has, in some ways, become a case study in scientific process. Extraordinary claims invite intense scrutiny, and replication is the standard of proof. Each new paper reporting nanodiamonds or spherules is met with attempts to replicate the findings elsewhere, often with mixed results. Each failure to replicate fuels skepticism, while each new claim renews interest. The debate has played out in journals, conferences, and media reports, capturing public imagination precisely because it resonates with ancient fears of catastrophe. For the wider public, the impact hypothesis holds particular allure because it connects the scientific with the mythic. A comet shattering in the sky, igniting wildfires, and plunging the Earth into chaos sounds like the stuff of legend. It echoes myths of fire and flood, of gods punishing humanity, of worlds destroyed overnight. It suggests that our ancestors may have preserved real memories of cosmic disaster in the stories we still tell. Even if the science remains uncertain, the narrative is powerful. What is clear, regardless of the cause, is that the Younger Dryas was catastrophic. Climate shifted in decades, animals disappeared, and humans faced immense upheaval. Whether by comet or by current, the world changed in a geological instant. To those alive at the time, it must have felt as though the sky and sea conspired against them. Their stories of floods and fire may be echoes of real trauma, preserved in myth as warnings for generations to come. In the final section of this chapter, we will consider why the impact hypothesis remains so divisive. Why does it persist despite criticism? Why does it capture the imagination so deeply? And what does it tell us about our desire to connect myth and science, to see in the stones and stories of the past the shadows of catastrophes that nearly erased us? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis sits at the intersection of science, myth, and imagination. To some researchers, It is a bold and elegant explanation for a cluster of puzzles that otherwise remain only partially resolved. To others, it is a distraction, an extraordinary claim supported by inconclusive evidence. Yet, beyond the scientific journals, it has taken on a life of its own. The idea that a cosmic impact devastated the Earth 12,800 years ago resonates far beyond geology because it speaks to a deep human intuition that catastrophe can strike from the sky without warning, reshaping the world in an instant. This intuition is ancient. Myths of fire and flood, of gods hurling stones from heaven, of dragons and fiery stars destroying the world, all echo the memory of celestial fear. Human beings have always looked upward with awe and dread. Comets were once seen as harbingers of doom. Meteors inspired rituals and taboos. The sky was not just a dome of stars, but a realm of potential danger. When the impact hypothesis emerged, it seemed to validate those old intuitions. It offered a scientific frame for the ancient fear that the heavens themselves could betray us. Among archaeologists, the controversy is sharpened by what is at stake. If the impact hypothesis were true, it would mean that one of the most important transitions in human history, the end of the Ice Age, the collapse of megafauna, and the dawn of agriculture was shaped by a sudden extraterrestrial catastrophe. It would mean that human history, rather than a steady arc of adaptation, was punctuated by a violent reset. Such a conclusion would transform our understanding of the past. Yet the evidence has not reached the level of certainty required to overturn established models. Critics emphasize that science demands rigorous replication. Many of the claimed markers of impact, nanodiamonds, spherules, magnetic grains, have proven difficult to reproduce consistently across sites. Some studies confirm them, others fail. The black matte layers vary in composition. The dating is often imprecise. These inconsistencies fuel skepticism. To critics, the hypothesis reflects the allure of catastrophe more than the weight of evidence. They argue that the ocean current disruption model explains the Younger Dryas adequately without invoking cosmic fire. Still, the hypothesis will not disappear because it answers questions that continue to trouble archaeology and paleontology. Why did so many large animals vanish so suddenly? Why did cultures like the Clovis disappear within centuries? Why do flood myths appear with such striking universality? Even if the evidence is contested, the hypothesis provides a narrative that links these mysteries together. And narratives, especially those that resonate with ancient fears, are powerful. Outside academia, the impact hypothesis has fueled speculation about lost civilizations. If a comet or asteroid shattered ecosystems and erased landscapes, might it also have destroyed early human cultures? Advocates of alternative history argue that the impact could have swept away settlements on coasts, leaving only fragmentary traces. They point to Göbekli Tepe as evidence that advanced symbolic culture existed just after the Younger Dryas. Perhaps, they suggest, this was the legacy of survivors from a more ancient culture erased by catastrophe. Mainstream scholars remain unconvinced, but the idea captures imagination precisely because it aligns myth, archaeology, and cosmic drama. There is also a modern resonance. In an age when we track asteroids and comets with telescopes, the impact hypothesis reminds us that cosmic threats are not theoretical. Large impacts have shaped Earth. Before the extinction of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago is proof of that. If a smaller but still devastating impact occurred only 12,800 years ago, it serves as a warning that such events are not confined to deep geological time. They are part of the human story. The impact hypothesis is not only about the past, but about our vulnerability in the present. The division between science and speculation may never be fully bridged. For some, the impact hypothesis will remain a fascinating but unproven idea. For others, it will remain a key to mysteries that conventional models cannot explain. What is certain is that the Younger Dryas, whatever its cause, was a time of upheaval. The climate shifted, animals disappeared, and humans endured a crucible that reshaped their world. Whether by comet, current, or both, the flood myths that followed may preserve the trauma of that era. As we leave this chapter, we step from science into the realm of interpretation. If a cosmic impact did occur, it may have erased entire chapters of human history, along with animals and ecosystems. If it did not, the myths of flood and fire still remind us of the fragility of human existence in a changing world. Either way, the Younger Dryas teaches us that catastrophe is woven into the human story. The next chapter turns to the question of knowledge itself. Myths, monuments, and maps hint at astronomy and awareness far older than we once believed. Could ancient peoples have carried forward fragments of forgotten wisdom, memories of the sky and the stars preserved through ritual and story? If so, then the legacy of lost worlds may not lie only in ruins beneath the sea, but in the constellations above. When we think of knowledge, we think of books, libraries, and written records. Yet long before writing was invented, humans carried knowledge in story, symbol, and stone. Across the world, myths preserve detailed accounts of the sky, monuments align with the solstices, and oral traditions encode surprising accuracy about landscapes long altered. These fragments have inspired many to argue that traces of forgotten wisdom survive from a time before civilization, perhaps even from cultures erased in the deep past. To separate fact from fantasy, we must look carefully at what the evidence really shows. One of the most striking examples is astronomy. Modern scholars have documented how ancient societies paid careful attention to the heavens. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids with stars, and the builders of Stonehenge oriented their stones to track solstices. In Central America, the Maya developed calendars of extraordinary precision, charting the cycles of Venus and predicting eclipses. In Polynesia, navigators crossed thousands of kilometers of ocean using only stars, currents, and memory. These achievements are remarkable in their own right, but some argue they point to even deeper roots. At Göbekli Tepe, some researchers suggest that carvings of animals on the pillars may encode constellations. A vulture holding a sphere has been interpreted as a comet striking Earth, possibly a record of the Younger Dryas impact. Others are cautious, warning that such readings are speculative. Still, the possibility that Ice Age peoples tracked the sky systematically raises provocative questions. If so, it would mean that astronomy, far from being a late development of agricultural societies, was already deeply embedded in human culture at the dawn of the Holocene. The theme repeats elsewhere. In the caves of Lascaux, painted more than 15,000 years ago, dots above a bull resemble the Pleiades cluster. Some scholars believe these marks were intentional, suggesting that even Ice Age artists depicted constellations alongside animals. If correct, this would be evidence of star knowledge stretching back into the deep Ice Age. Oral traditions too hint at long continuity. Aboriginal stories in Australia describe the stars as a canoe crossing the sky, or as ancestors watching from above, and these stories are tied to seasonal cycles of hunting and gathering. Such traditions show that the stars were not only symbols but calendars, essential for survival. Another enduring puzzle is the Piri Reis map, created in the early 16th century by an Ottoman admiral. The map is famous for allegedly depicting coastlines of South America and even Antarctica with striking accuracy. Some claim that it must have been based on far older sources, perhaps from a forgotten seafaring culture of the Ice Age. Skeptics argue that the apparent accuracy is overstated, that the map reflects known European charts combined with guesswork. But the idea that knowledge of coastlines existed before modern exploration continues to intrigue, feeding the narrative of lost geographies remembered imperfectly across centuries. The question of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts the position of the stars over millennia, adds another layer. Precession was formally discovered by Hipparchus of Greece in the 2nd century before Christ. Yet some myths and monuments appear to encode awareness of star movements across long spans of time. The alignments of temples in Egypt, the cycles embedded in Hindu cosmology, and references in Mesopotamian texts have been interpreted by some as evidence of precessional knowledge thousands of years earlier. To mainstream scholars, such claims are often overstated. Alignments may be coincidental, cycles symbolic rather than scientific, but the possibility that ancient peoples tracked slow cosmic rhythms remains tantalizing. What we know for certain is that humans have always been sky watchers. The heavens provided a clock, a compass, and a canvas for story. Knowledge of solstices and equinoxes was not optional, it was essential for planting, migration, and survival. To encode this knowledge, societies built monuments, told myths, and taught each generation to read the sky. That such traditions appear in distant cultures is not evidence of a lost global civilization, but of shared human needs and capacities. Still, the precision and persistence of some examples suggest that memory may stretch farther back than we once thought. It is here that the line between archaeology and alternative history blurs. Mainstream archaeology sees in ancient astronomy the ingenuity of societies working with naked eyes, careful observation, and oral transmission. Alternative theorists see evidence of inherited knowledge, fragments of a forgotten science passed down from a lost world. The truth may lie somewhere in between. What matters is not whether Atlantis taught the Maya to track Venus, but that humans everywhere had the capacity to observe, calculate, and remember. We do not need a lost civilization to explain this brilliance. It was always within us. Yet, the allure of ancient knowledge endures because it reveals something profound, that humans are not only survivors, but dreamers. Long before books, telescopes, or satellites, we sought to understand our place in the cosmos. We carved animals and stars into stone, we aligned temples with the sun, and we carried stories of constellations across millennia. If fragments of this knowledge echo older than we expect, it is not proof of lost civilizations, but of the depth of human continuity. We are the inheritors of a memory that stretches back tens of thousands of years, preserved in ritual, myth, and sky. And yet, the possibility remains that something more was preserved. Myths of floods, monuments aligned to stars, and maps of vanished coastlines raise the question of how much knowledge may have been lost when the seas rose. If coastal peoples of the Ice Age developed astronomy or seafaring, their settlements are now beneath 100 meters of ocean. The monuments we know may only be the survivors, the fragments of a broader tradition erased by water. Whether we call this a lost civilization or simply the shadow of forgotten ingenuity, the result is the same. The past is more complex than we once believed. As we close this chapter, the lesson is clear. Ancient knowledge exists, and it is extraordinary. It shows that humans everywhere were capable of careful observation, symbolic thought, and cultural memory. It may hint at older roots, at traditions carried across cataclysm and time, but to leap from this to claims of a global advanced civilization is to cross from evidence into speculation. What we can say, with confidence, is that fragments of the past still live in story and stone, waiting for us to read them with humility. From here, we turn to the larger question. If humans carried such knowledge, could they also have survived the Ice Age with more complexity than we think? Were their coastal cultures erased by rising seas, or even seafaring peoples who left only traces in myth? In the next chapter, we will explore the possibility that fragments of civilization survived the long winter of ice, leaving behind tantalizing hints of what once was. When we imagine the Ice Age, we often picture a bleak world of glaciers stretching across continents, herds of mammoths trudging through snow, and humans huddled in caves for warmth. The reality was more complex. While vast sheets of ice did cover much of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia during the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago, large areas of the world remained habitable. The tropics, subtropics, and coastal plains exposed by lower seas offered rich environments where humans thrived as hunter-gatherers. It is within these landscapes that the possibility of early complexity arises. Archaeology paints a picture of small, mobile groups, but also of extraordinary creativity. In Europe, Ice Age caves reveal paintings of animals rendered with astonishing detail, such as those in Lascaux and Chauvet. Some of these paintings are more than 30,000 years old, testifying to symbolic thought that rivals modern art. In Siberia, the Venus figurines carved from mammoth ivory embody a symbolic tradition stretching across vast distances. In Australia, Aboriginal traditions link to rock art sites tens of thousands of years old. These are not the works of people barely scraping by, but of societies with leisure, ritual, and memory. Yet, to call them civilizations in the sense we use the word today is a leap too far. Civilization, as archaeologists define it, implies permanent settlements, agriculture, cities, and social hierarchies. None of these are attested in the Ice Age record. What we do see is complexity social networks, symbolic traditions, and advanced technologies for survival. The bow and arrow, fishing nets, sewn clothing, and bone needles all emerged in this period. People crossed open water to settle islands like Australia and the Ryukyus. These feats imply seafaring, planning, and cultural memory. If we widen our definition, we might say that Ice Age peoples carried the seeds of civilization even if they did not build cities. One of the strongest arguments for lost settlements lies beneath the sea. At the height of the Ice Age, sea levels were more than 120 meters lower than today. Vast coastal plains stretched outward from every continent. Where London now looks across the English Channel, there was once Doggerland, a broad, low plain teeming with game and dotted with rivers. Southeast Asia was not a scattering of islands, but a single great peninsula, the Sunda Shelf, linking Sumatra, Java, and Borneo to the mainland. In the Persian Gulf, a fertile valley lay, where now there is only water. These drowned landscapes would have been prime habitats, rich with resources, and likely home to dense human populations. As the ice melted, the seas rose, swallowing these plains. Any settlements, camps, or early experiments in permanent living along these coasts now lie beneath the ocean. Archaeology is land-bound by necessity, which means we see only the fragments that survived inland. It is entirely plausible that crucial chapters of human development are lost to the sea. This does not mean there were cities of stone and steel, but it does suggest that what we think of as the beginning of civilization, sedentism, agriculture, monumental architecture, might have deeper roots drowned beneath the waves. The evidence for Ice Age seafaring strengthens this possibility. Humans reached Australia more than 60,000 years ago, implying open ocean crossings of dozens of kilometers. The islands of Melanesia and Japan were also settled in the Pleistocene, requiring boats and navigational skill. Polynesian navigation, preserved much later, demonstrates how oral tradition and star lore can support long-distance voyages without instruments. If Ice Age peoples mastered such techniques, then trade and communication networks may have extended across coasts now lost. Civilization, in this sense, might have been maritime as much as terrestrial, and rising seas could have erased its footprints. Another dimension is symbolic thought. The persistence of motifs across vast regions suggests that Ice Age peoples shared ideas over long distances. The Venus figurines, carved from ivory and stone, appear from Spain to Siberia, separated by thousands of kilometers. Cave art depicts not only animals but abstract symbols, dots, grids, and signs that some researchers believe represent a proto-writing system. If so, then systems of symbolic communication may have existed long before the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia. These symbols may not have carried the complexity of a written language, but they reveal the human impulse to record, transmit, and preserve knowledge. Could such symbolic systems, combined with seafaring and ritual, amount to a form of civilization? It depends on how we define the word. If by civilization we mean dense cities and bureaucracies, the answer is no. The archaeological record does not show evidence of urbanism in the Ice Age. But if we broaden the concept to mean networks of shared culture, memory, and symbolic practice, then the answer is more nuanced. The Ice Age peoples lived in small groups, but they were part of larger cultural worlds connected by trade, migration, and story. In that sense, they carried a civilization of the mind, even if not of stone. The strongest evidence against a lost global civilization is the absence of durable material culture. No Ice Age site has produced metal smelting, large-scale architecture, or evidence of organized states. Göbekli Tepe, at 12,000 years old, remains the earliest megalithic site known, and it already challenged assumptions by appearing before agriculture. To push such achievements back another 8,000 years would require evidence we do not yet have. It is possible that rising seas erased some evidence, but stone monuments, quarries, or tools would likely survive inland. Their absence is telling. Still, the question remains open at the edges. Archaeologists have uncovered tantalizing hints of settlement in submerged areas. Off the coast of India, structures at Dwarka and in the Gulf of Cambay have sparked debate, though many are likely natural formations. Near Japan, the Yonaguni monument resembles terraces and steps, though most geologists argue it is natural erosion. In the Bahamas, the Bimini Road resembles blocks of cut stone, but is more likely fractured beach rock. These examples are often championed as lost cities, yet they remain ambiguous. What they do remind us, however, is that the ocean conceals vast areas of human history that we have barely begun to explore. In the end, the question of whether a civilization could have survived the Ice Age is less about Atlantis or global empires, and more about the fragility of evidence. Humans were complex, symbolic, and capable long before the rise of agriculture. They painted the sky on cave walls, crossed seas, and built networks of story and ritual. They lived on coasts that are now underwater, leaving traces we cannot yet recover. Whether this amounts to civilization in the strict sense or not, it complicates the simple narrative that history began only 6,000 years ago. What matters is continuity. The seeds of civilization, symbolic thought, navigation, memory, and art were already present in the Ice Age. When the Younger Dryas ended and the Holocene began, those seeds bloomed in places like Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Indus Valley. Civilization was not a sudden invention, but an unfolding of capacities long prepared. In that sense, to ask whether a civilization could have survived the Ice Age is to recognize that civilization is not only stone and metal, but the human mind itself. That mind endured glaciers, floods, and fire, carrying memory forward into the dawn of history. As we turn to the next chapter, the stage shifts from possibility to confrontation. Archaeology, with its demand for evidence and skepticism, has long resisted claims of lost civilizations. Yet alternative theorists, from Ignatius Donnelly to Graham Hancock, continue to argue otherwise. The tension between mainstream science and speculation reveals as much about us today as it does about the past. Why do we long for forgotten worlds, and what does that longing say about the way we see ourselves in time? The idea of a lost civilization has always held a powerful place in the human imagination. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, the drowned kingdoms of myth, all suggest that our story is incomplete, that something grand lies hidden beneath oceans or buried beneath time. Yet when we look to archaeology, the picture is different. The discipline, built on the careful recovery of artifacts, layers, and dates, paints a story of gradual emergence. Hunter-gatherers becoming farmers, villages becoming towns, towns becoming cities, and cities eventually becoming empires. This progression is not always smooth, but it is consistent. To archaeologists, the evidence of a sudden, advanced global civilization tens of thousands of years ago is simply not there. Why is mainstream archaeology so skeptical? The answer lies in the methods of the science itself. Archaeology is built on stratigraphy, the study of layers of soil and their contents. Each layer represents a slice of time. Pottery, tools, bones, and structures are dated according to their context in these layers. Radiocarbon dating and other techniques add precision. When patterns emerge, they must be backed by multiple lines of evidence, repeated findings at different sites, consistent dating, and clear connections. Extraordinary claims such as the existence of an advanced Ice Age civilization require extraordinary evidence. Without artifacts, writing, or structures beyond dispute, archaeologists see little reason to abandon the framework that already explains the evidence we have. The strongest case against a lost global civilization is the absence of durable material culture. No sites older than 12,000 years show evidence of cities, metallurgy, large-scale agriculture, or writing. Göbekli Tepe is the outlier, a monumental complex built before farming, but even it does not prove urbanism or advanced technology. It proves only that humans were capable of complex ritual architecture earlier than expected. To extend this into claims of vanished empires is, for most archaeologists, a leap too far. The caution of the discipline is not resistance to imagination, but insistence on evidence. And yet, outside academic circles, the allure of alternative theories remains strong. Writers like Ignatius Donnelly in the 19th century and Graham Hancock in the present have popularized the idea that a great civilization once existed and was destroyed by catastrophe. Donnelly's book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, argued that all ancient cultures were descended from a single mother civilization. Hancock has revived the idea, pointing to flood myths, astronomical alignments, and anomalous sites like Göbekli Tepe as signs of an advanced culture lost at the end of the Ice Age. His work, though dismissed by most archaeologists, has reached millions of readers and viewers. Why do such theories persist, despite mainstream rejection? Part of the answer lies in human psychology. We are drawn to grand narratives. The story that humanity rose from small tribes to global empires over tens of thousands of years is impressive, but it lacks the drama of lost worlds swallowed by the sea. The notion of forgotten civilizations offers mystery, a sense of hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. It appeals to our instinct that the past must be deeper, stranger, and more complex than we know. There is also the issue of gaps in the record. Archaeology is by nature incomplete. For every site uncovered, countless others remain buried or destroyed. The sea has swallowed entire landscapes since the Ice Age. Oral traditions speak of lands now lost. It is easy to imagine that what we see is only a fragment of a larger story, and that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Alternative theorists seize on these gaps to argue that mainstream archaeology is too narrow, too cautious, too unwilling to consider radical possibilities. Yet there is also a deeper cultural divide. Archaeology operates within the framework of scientific rigor, demanding replication and peer review. Alternative theories operate in the realm of narrative and speculation, free to weave connections without strict evidentiary chains. Both serve different purposes. One seeks to build knowledge slowly, the other seeks to inspire imagination. The friction between them arises when speculation is presented as evidence, or when science is accused of deliberate blindness. Archaeologists bristle at claims that they suppress inconvenient discoveries, while alternative theorists bristle at being dismissed as fantasists. This tension has played out repeatedly in public debates. When Göbekli Tepe was excavated, it became a touchstone. To archaeologists, it proved that humans could build monumental architecture as hunter-gatherers. To Hancock and others, it proved that knowledge from a lost civilization survived into the Holocene. When flood myths are discussed, archaeologists see symbolic narratives rooted in common human experience of local floods. Alternative theorists see encoded memories of global cataclysm. The same evidence, filtered through different lenses, produces different stories. What unites both camps, ironically, is the recognition that the past is still full of mysteries. Archaeologists acknowledge that much remains unknown: the meaning of ancient symbols, the roots of migrations, the reasons for cultural collapses. Alternative theorists seize on these uncertainties as opportunities for speculation. The difference lies in what each is willing to infer. Archaeology prefers to admit ignorance where evidence is lacking. Alternative history prefers to fill the gaps with imaginative reconstruction. Both approaches reveal something about the human need for story. The danger lies in blurring lines. When speculation is presented as fact, it can mislead. Claims of advanced technology without evidence risk distorting our understanding of the real achievements of ancient peoples. The Egyptians, Maya, or Sumerians do not need Atlantis to explain their brilliance. Their accomplishments are greater precisely because they arose independently. On the other hand, archaeology risks alienating the public when it dismisses questions out of hand. The fascination with lost civilizations shows a hunger for mystery that should not be ignored. The challenge is to balance skepticism with openness, to encourage curiosity while insisting on evidence. In the end, The debate between archaeology and alternative theories is not only about the past, it is about how we see ourselves. If we believe in lost golden ages, we frame humanity as forgetful, always rising and falling. If we trust only in the slow climb of archaeology, we frame ourselves as steadily advancing. Both perspectives reflect hopes and fears about our future. Perhaps the truth lies in between. Catastrophes have struck, floods have erased lands, and knowledge has been lost. But civilization as we know it seems to have emerged only in the last 10,000 years, building on capacities long prepared. As we step into the final chapter, we leave behind the clash of science and speculation to consider the deeper legacy of the idea. Why do myths of lost worlds endure? Why do we continue to search for Atlantis beneath the waves, or Mu in the Pacific, or Lemuria in the Indian Ocean? Perhaps the answer lies not in what was, but in what we long for. The idea of forgotten civilizations tells us something profound about ourselves, about the way we imagine history and our place within it. For centuries, the idea of a forgotten world has lingered at the edge of human thought. From Plato's Atlantis to the flood myths carried across cultures, from the strange monuments of Göbekli Tepe to the drowned plains beneath the sea, we sense that history is not a closed book but a tapestry with missing threads. Whether we believe in a lost global civilization or not, the fascination reveals something profound about who we are. It shows that we are a species haunted by memory, driven by imagination, and always searching for continuity between past, present, and future. The archaeological record tells us a sober story. Civilization, in the strict sense, arose only in the last 10,000 years. Agriculture appeared, cities followed, writing systems emerged, and states rose and fell. The timeline is consistent across continents, though staggered in detail. No evidence has yet shown that an advanced urban civilization existed before this period. The material record tools, pottery, architecture, and artifacts point to gradual evolution rather than sudden leaps. From this perspective, the notion of a lost Ice Age civilization remains unproven. And yet, the human story is not limited to stone ruins. Before cities, before writing, humans already carried symbolic worlds. The cave painters of Lascaux and Chauvet, the carvers of Venus figurines, the navigators who crossed oceans to Australia, all show capacities indistinguishable from ours. The seeds of civilization were present tens of thousands of years ago. If we define civilization not only by walls and streets but by knowledge, memory, and art, then the Ice Age was already a time of civilizations of the mind. What we call the dawn of civilization was not an invention but an unfolding, a flowering of capacities already rooted deep in the human past. The appeal of lost worlds lies partly in the gaps. Rising seas erased vast landscapes where people surely lived. Doggerland, Sunda, and the Persian Gulf Basin were all fertile plains drowned after the Ice Age. Their stories are largely lost to us, their settlements hidden beneath 100 meters of ocean. It is reasonable to imagine that experiments in sedentism or agriculture took place there, erased without a trace. The absence of evidence is not proof of grandeur, but it is a reminder of how fragile evidence is. Archaeology, bound by what survives, can only tell part of the story. The rest, inevitably, fuels speculation. This is where myth enters. Flood stories, fire from the sky, lands swallowed by waves, these are not random fictions. They echo experiences of real catastrophe. The Younger Dryas, whether caused by shifting currents or by a comet, brought chaos that would have felt apocalyptic. The sea level rise that followed remade coastlines and drowned worlds. To those who lived through it, these events were more than natural phenomena. They were cosmic dramas, encoded in story and passed through generations. In this sense, myth preserves what archaeology cannot, the emotional truth of catastrophe, the lived experience of survival. Alternative theories flourish because they give these myths a stage. They connect flood legends to vanished civilizations, align monuments with constellations, and read maps as echoes of forgotten geographies. Critics call this speculation, and often it is. But it also expresses a hunger, that pure science sometimes neglects: the hunger for wonder, for mystery, for a past that is as alive as the present. The endurance of the Atlantis story is not about whether Atlantis was real. It is about the longing for continuity, the desire to believe that greatness has risen and fallen before, and that we are not the first to dream of vast cities and lost knowledge. Mainstream archaeology, with its rigor and caution, has its own legacy. It reminds us that the achievements of Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, China, the Maya, and countless other societies are all the more extraordinary because they arose independently. They did not inherit their brilliance from a vanished empire. They built it themselves, from the ground up, step by step. This truth honors humanity's resilience. To imagine that pyramids or calendars required Atlantean instruction is to diminish the real ingenuity of the cultures that created them. And yet, there is room for humility. Our timeline of civilization is shaped by what we have found, and what we have found is limited. Archaeology is young compared to the span of human history. Entire regions remain unexplored, and beneath the seas lie worlds we have scarcely begun to map. The story of humanity is incomplete, and perhaps always will be. The absence of evidence for a lost civilization is not proof that one never existed, only that if it did, its traces lie beyond our reach. What then is the legacy of the idea? It is not about proving or disproving Atlantis, it is about the way humans confront the unknown. The myth of lost civilizations is a mirror we hold to ourselves. It reflects our fear of catastrophe, our memory of floods and fire, our longing for continuity, and our awareness of fragility. It tells us that we are always on the edge of forgetting, that our achievements are vulnerable to time, and that what seems permanent can vanish overnight. In a sense, we are the lost civilization of the future. 10,000 years from now, what will remain of our cities, our machines, our satellites? Will future archaeologists see us clearly, or will they piece together fragments and wonder if we too had predecessors erased by flood or fire? The questions we ask about Atlantis are the same questions that might one day be asked about us. Perhaps the truth is simpler than myth and deeper than speculation. Perhaps there was no Atlantis, no global Ice Age empire, but the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, the flood stories of Mesopotamia and India, the drowned plains beneath the oceans, and the alignments of stars in stone remind us that history is always more complex than the textbooks suggest. Our past is not a straight line but a braided river, with channels that disappear and re-emerge, carrying fragments of memory across millennia. The seductive idea of lost civilizations endures because it speaks to the unfinished nature of history. We are a species that remembers, forgets, and remembers again. Myths keep alive what archaeology cannot. Science guards the discipline of evidence, while imagination keeps open the door of wonder. Between them lies the truth of who we are, creatures shaped by both fact and story, forever seeking to understand the ruins of time. So, as we close this journey, one lesson remains. Whether or not a great civilization rose and fell 20,000 years ago, the mystery of human history is not diminished, it is deepened. The lost worlds may not be real, but the search for them reveals something more enduring. Our desire to belong to a story older than ourselves, to see in the shifting sands of time not only what we have built, but what we might yet lose. And perhaps, in that desire, there lies the most enduring legacy of all.